Good afternoon, everybody. We are just about ready to start. We are recording this session for documentation purposes. So we'll just give it one more minute to let folks jump on, and then we'll go ahead and get started. Thank you for joining us today. If you're just joining us, we are about to get started. We are recording this session for documentation purposes, and we thank you for joining us today. My name is Christina Byrne, and I'm the Department Manager of Public Outreach at OCTA. And I have with me today several other associates at OCTA, Dan Fu, as well as from our consultant team, Rob Klobowski. So we are about to get started with going through our major employers and business interest listening session for the Coastal Rail Resiliency Study. We ask that at the beginning of this session, if you would be so kind as to turn on your camera so we can see you. We'd really appreciate it if you could feel comfortable. And just to initially greet us, and if you could also introduce yourself in the chat by putting your name and organization or agency or business, that would be very helpful for us. Again, if you could go ahead and introduce yourself by putting your name and organization or agency or business in the chat, that would be much appreciated. And as we go through the presentation today, no need to wait to the end if you have any verbal comments. Please feel free to raise your hand and we will call on you, and you can turn on your camera when you have your question, or you can simply put your question in the chat and we'll be monitoring that as well. But you do not need to wait till the end. You can ask your questions as we go through the presentation. And I see folks putting their name and affiliation in the chat, and I really appreciate you doing so. Next slide, please. So again, introductions for those that are just joining us. I'm Christina Byrne, and I'm the Department Manager of Public Outreach at OCTA. And Dan, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, thank you, Christina. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Dan Fu from the OCTA Planning Division, and I'm the project manager on this effort.
And Rob, if you could introduce yourself.
Good afternoon, all. I'm Rob Klobowski with HDR Engineering, and I'm the project manager for the consulting team for this Coastal Rail Resiliency Study.
Thank you. All right, next slide, please. Our agenda for today is Dan will be going through the study history, some goals and objectives, including short and midterm study and potential reinforcement areas, followed by the study schedule and key milestones. I will be covering the study outreach and the opportunities for the public to weigh in on this important study. And then we'll be conducting a listening session. We'll have a series of facilitated questions with you to sort of get some more feedback from you throughout the study process. And then lastly, we'll go through the next steps from this point forward. Next slide. And now I'll turn it over to Dan Fu to go through the history.
All right, thank you, Christina. And again, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for spending time out of your busy schedule to join us to give you an update on this study. It's called the Coastal Rail Resiliency Study. So I just want to maybe take a moment. I know there are some folks who may not be as familiar with what has gone on over the last handful of years down in South Orange County. So I'll just take a quick moment and just kind of give you some background information as to kind of the genesis for why we ended up undertaking this study. So with respect to this particular table, really the takeaway, there are a couple of takeaways. You can see that on the first 4 line items, and we have some follow-on photos to I can talk more to, but with the first 4 line items, those are emergency projects that OCTA, as the owner of the railroad in Orange County, in collaboration with Metrolink, who's the operator for passenger rail service for the region, have had to undertake to ensure that we minimize any impacts to service disruption. So all of these events have led to service disruptions and there's been quite a bit of efforts over just the last handful of years. And then the other takeaway is that the city of San Clemente has also undertaken some other efforts to combat basically climate change. And I know our friends over at the Army Corps of Engineers are on this call. So one project that the city's has been working closely with the Army Corps of Engineers is the what we call the San Clemente Shoreline Project, which is a sand replenishment project, and that was initiated at the end of last year, and there were some challenges along the way, so I understand that's at least kind of put on pause. And then finally, the city has undertaken what they call a nature-based coastal resiliency feasibility study to look at some of the natural solutions down within the city's jurisdictions. So next slide, please. So I'll just quickly go over the next 3 slides just to give you the essence of some of the emergencies we've had to address over the last several years. So with respect to this particular location, it is, and on the railroad system, it's starting with the milepost. So at this particular location, it's actually located adjacent to the city of San Clemente's Cypress Shore community. And we've had a couple of situations here on the coastal side or seaward side. There was a lack of beach that led to basically the integrity of the railroad being compromised. And then on the inland side, there was an ancient landslide that was slipping. And this all happened between fall of 2021 as well as, I believe, spring of 2022. And so there was some remedial actions undertaken by OCTA and Metrolink by way of riprap placement on the coastal side to secure the toe of the slope. And then on the inland side, there was a tieback solutions, if you will. It's kind of like a nuts and bolt concept that basically secures and holds back the mast, the land mast that's on the inland side. And rail operation resumed in spring of last year. Okay, next slide, please. So the next incident happened at what we call the Casa Romantica site. This is a gardens and cultural center. That's actually, the facility is owned by the city of San Clemente, although it's operated by a third-party nonprofit. And you can see that these pictures tell 1,000 words. On the left side, you can see that the patio just gave way, or the earth underneath the patio gave way. And hence the bottom picture shows the landmass just coming down onto the railroad, and passenger service was suspended. And as a result, we had to work closely with Metrolink and the city to put in what we call a catchment wall, temporary barrier wall. That's on the lower left-hand side. You can see that there's a wall that's erected there. Service was restored around summer of last year, July of last year. Next slide, please. And last but not least, the most recent situation, I'm sure some of you have heard, or many of you have either seen it on the news or heard it on the radio. This is the most recent landslide that occurred in January of this year at what is called the Mariposa Point. That on the upper left-hand side, you see a trail in the background, and then there's a bridge that's part of the beach trail, and that's operated by the city of San Clemente. So with the earth failing and basically with that landslide, it dislodged a couple segments of the bridge off of its foundation. You can see that on the upper left-hand corner. And so Metrolink and OCTA undertook, basically service has been suspended as of late January, and OCTA and Metrolink undertook some emergency remedial actions by way of clearing the debris, as well as removing a couple spans of the bridge, as well as regrading that slope. So work is still under progress, primarily because there's still a bit of movement with the earth, and so as I noted, work is still under progress. So I think you can see, starting from fall of 21 through even the beginning of this year, there have been 3 major events. But what I haven't shown here there are a number of other minor events that have occurred in terms of landslide in these areas. That's part of the South Orange County coastal rail line within the 7-mile stretch. So next slide, please. So next, next slide, please. Next, I want to get into a little more about, so what I showed you a moment ago was really the genesis for why there's a sense of urgency in terms of needing to look at what can be done so we can get ahead of things rather than being reactive and having to address emergencies, having to deal with unplanned service disruptions, and in many instances for an extended period. So what OCTA did last year was we initiated what we call the Coastal Rail Resiliency Plan to look at kind of a short and a midterm solutions. So in terms of looking at this, the goals and objectives really are, how do we protect the railroad in place under its current alignment, and really trying to minimize any more surprises that we have endured over the last several years. So in terms of short-term plans, we're looking at solutions that could last us upwards of a decade, and then medium terms upwards of several decades. And if the question is, what are those solutions? We're not there yet. What we wanted to basically do, and Christina is going to talk more about this, is we want to basically have a lot of these listening sessions with a wide spectrum of stakeholders, understand their perspective and so forth before we really do a deep dive into what these solutions might be, and then come back and actually solicit more additional input. So the stakeholder engagement is really a key component of this whole effort. Next slide, please. So this is really more of, the way I see this is a mini study within the larger study, the preceding slide that I was sharing with you in terms of short and midterm solutions. In light of all of the emergencies that we have endured over the last several years, I started that with the information earlier. What we wanted to try to do is get ahead of things. And what the HDR team did was initiated or undertook this initial assessment of the 7-mile stretch, looking at it from a milepost to milepost, and identifying by way of field observations as well as a desktop literature search on what are imminent threats out there that we need to basically take action or actions on. And then along the way, where are the areas where we need to keep an eye on? And it could be such that it could elevate to a level of needing to take immediate action. So I'll do a deeper dive into that, but that's really the essence of why we had undertaken this initial assessment. And it's not really to look at necessarily short and long term, although some of those, there's going to always be a nexus in terms of all of this. But I think that's really the main objectives when we at the onset of why we wanted to undertake this process. And so the other key is, with respect to the literature search, we are looking to, we have built on previous efforts, and the goal is to identify areas that we need to keep an eye on, and we call those monitoring areas, and then areas that that we need to take immediate actions, and those are called reinforcement areas. So next slide, please. Next slide. So in terms of the initial assessment, just a little more on that. Again, it's really looking at it from the perspective of the railroad, whether it's the owner OCTA or the operators, being either Metrolink or Amtrak in this case, and even the freight operator, BNSF. The focus is really, how do we try to get ahead of things and not have any more unplanned surprises that we have talked about. And then we'll need to figure out, in terms of next steps, how do we basically put those issue areas that we have identified into on the ground. So next slide, please. So here's a summary table of 7 areas that we have identified as needing for us to really keep an eye on, or we call them monitoring areas. And I think if you kind of glance without going area by area, there's a common denominator with each erosion. So there is is quite a bit of a challenge along the 7-mile stretch, where you can see that there are a number of locations where there are challenges on the seaboard side. Although there is one area, and we have talked about this earlier, under number 4, that's on the inland side that we've already seen before our eyes with the slope failure. Next slide. So just kind of, I'll go quickly over these monitoring areas. So here you can see under area number 1, south of Doheny Beach, there is it's kind of trending in the wrong direction in terms of beach erosion. So we want to make sure to keep an eye on that. And then area number 2, with the outfall and pedestrian underpass at Pochi Beach, we want to also keep an eye on that potential issue that may arise out of this area. Next slide, please. And then for area number 3 at North Beach, there's a lack of beach on the seaward side. And so we have had to work with Metrolink to undertake some remedial actions over the years to protect the integrity of the railroad. And then areas number 4 and 5, unfortunately, that is a photo of the Mariposa pedestrian beach trail or beach bridge that actually is no longer in place, with a couple of spans already removed as a result of the landslide that we experienced at milepost 204.2. Next slide. And then rounding out the monitoring areas, there's number 6, which is in the Calafia Beach area. Even though the erosion is occurring further inland, but with the amount of sedimentation that basically gets into the railroad, we've had situations where there's temporary closures as a result of sedimentation onto the railroad tracks. And then finally, in the area around Cypress Shore, you may recall that there were some remedial actions undertaken earlier that I have touched on. There continues to be some challenges in that particular area. So next slide, please. So next, I want to maybe touch on the 4 potential reinforcement areas. So the first 7 are really areas that we need to keep an eye on. And then these 4 really rise to the occasion of something needs to be done really sooner rather than later, or we're going to basically experience another emergency shutdown with passenger and or freight rail service. And I think maybe we'll just jump to number 3. That's already happened with respect to the milepost 204.2, where with the Mariposa Beach, the bridge failure of the slope adjacent to it, that's already caused the railroad to be shut down since late January. And then with respect to the other 3 areas, areas number 1, 2, and 4, those are really more issues and challenges on the seaward side. So I think all in all, if you look at the pattern, there are basically challenges on both sides of the railroad, whether it is the receding beach that's led to or leading to potentially the railroad being compromised, or you have a slope failure on the inland that, again, with the erosion and the slope failure, that's causing service disruption to the railroad. So it's really a challenge to have to combat both sides, but I think that's really the key takeaway with these 7 monitoring areas as well as the 4 potential reinforcement areas. So next slide, please. So here's a little bit of a deeper dive into the 4 potential reinforcement areas. Number 1, it's in this particular area where we're having some challenges on the seaward side. So the potential solutions, and I'll underscore its potential at this point because there hasn't been a deep dive in terms of what the ultimate solution or solutions will be. So this is really more of a preliminary assessment, and what the recommendations are would be engineer revetment. And I think go to the next slide, please. So similar situation under reinforcement area number 2. It's due to the lack of beach, there needs to be some sort of reinforcement to protect the integrity of the railroad. So moving on to slide number 3, please. So number 3 is where it's different. It's an inland challenge, not so much a seaward. And we have talked about the fact that the pedestrian bridge and the slope failure has led to the dislodging of a couple spans of the bridge. and that particular emergency is still underway. In terms of the potential solution or solutions, some sort of a wall is what we're looking at this time. However, I want to underscore the challenge with respect to this particular location, since there is the bridge that was, or the trail as well as the bridge that's currently in that alignment. Whatever we do, there needs to be some sort of restoration of the bridge at a future date. So we need to make sure whatever we do does not preclude the ability for the city to restore the pedestrian bridge and trail access. So I think that's one of the major challenges we're facing here. There's not a lot of room to work with. And then there are also there's also a sewer line as well as a drainage that is in the vicinity. So it's not just the trail and the bridge, but there are other impediments. So this is where it's quite a bit of a challenge to really find a sweet spot where we can put the wall to protect the railroad, but at the same time not preclude, for instance, the restoration of the beach trail. Next slide, please. So number 4, similar to areas numbers 1 and 2, it's challenge on the seaward side, and a similar potential solution, and that is the engineer revetment. Next slide, please. So in terms of the next steps for the initial assessment, what we have basically looked at in terms of these 4 areas is really a singular project with different locations and different challenges. And what we want to do is continue to engage the appropriate stakeholders, whether, for instance, it's the Army Corps of Engineers or the California Coastal Commission and others on the path forward. And that way we can have a united kind of front in terms of what the solutions are on a go-forward basis. And then finally, I want to note that the other recommendation coming out of this whole initial assessment exercise is there needs to be kind of a strategic approach to stockpile materials in the event of an emergency. So that is something that we need to work closely with our operating partner, Metrolink, to identify a suitable site for the stockpiling of materials. Next slide, please. So next, I'm going to go and just kind of touch on the study schedule. Next slide. So I had given you the background and the outcome of the initial assessment. That process was initiated late last year, and it concluded in January of this year. And we're looking to release the report sometime later this month. And then in terms of listening sessions, this is one of many listening sessions that we are going to be holding, and we've already held a couple with different groups. And the plan is to actually have these listening sessions through late spring of this year. And then in terms of kind of doing a deeper dive into the study itself, what we want to do is kind of firm up, much like in any other study or project, the purpose and need, and coming up with evaluation criteria. And really the evaluation criteria is going to be the byproduct of or in conjunction with the input from the various listening sessions along the way. And we're hoping to basically get that underway during the spring timeframe. And then in terms of coming up with initial concepts, we're looking to start that in the spring timeframe, and then come up with basically concepts by the fall timeframe. And I think the key for this particular item is we're going to come back to various stakeholders to make sure that we check in terms of the concepts. So first starting with the listening sessions, then going to the drawing board, and then coming back and letting those same similar folks know that based on the feedback and so forth, we've come up with these ideas. And then what we're going to look to do is go back to the drawing board and refine the concepts based on additional input. And that's going to occur sometime spring of next year. And then in terms of having some sort of a draft report, feasibility study report, we're looking at spring, summer timeframe of next year. And then coming back and actually you can see these checkpoints. I think that's really the key takeaway for each one of these major milestones is really coming back to the various stakeholders with key check-ins and getting their additional feedback. So next slide, please. So with that, I'll hand it off to Christina, who's going to do a deeper dive on outreach efforts.
Dan, before we move into study outreach, there is a question in the chat that I wanted to acknowledge. I see that Rick, you had a question. Do you want to turn on your camera and speak so Dan can answer your question? I can read it in the chat too. Rick asks, where will these stockpiles be located?
So thank you for that question, Rick, and welcome. At this point, we haven't really identified specific stockpile sites, if you will, but I think one thing to kind of look at from a, if you will, a 10,000-foot level is those stockpile sites need to be accessible by rail. And the reason is, if you look at the challenge and the common denominator and the seaward side is there's not a lot of beach. So in order to mobilize on a beach side, that really isn't much of an option. So in terms of stockpile sites, it needs to be accessible by rail. And there are sites from the existing condition. For example, there is a Metrolink maintenance facility to the south. That is one possibility, although that particular facility wasn't necessarily designed to accommodate additional stockpiling of material. So we'll need to work with our partners over at Metrolink to make sure that while we're taking up the space for the top stockpiling, if we were to go and use that particular site, we're not creating additional challenges for Metrolink in terms of their day-to-day operations. So that's really kind of the balancing act and the challenge that we need to look at with respect to the stockpile sites.
Great, thank you, Dan. I appreciate you answering that question. Moving on to study outreach, in addition to the listening sessions that this is one of, we will be circulating the draft concept outreach as Dan shared in the previous slide as far as the schedule is concerned. The draft concept will be circulated as well as the draft plan, and we'd love for all of you to participate in that process as well. And then community engagement is an ongoing process, and we're looking at it as a feedback loop. So if you have any other organizations that you think would benefit from this information, please feel free to share it with them. We'd be happy to provide other briefings as necessary or requested. That is not a problem at all. And anything you can do to help spread the word regarding this study would be much appreciated. Next slide. Again, these are the various times at which public outreach will be engaged. In addition to the listening sessions, we will have the initial concept development. We'll obtain feedback from stakeholders and interest groups at that point, which is in the fall of this year. And then the refinement will take place also with feedback from stakeholders and interest groups in the spring of 2025, with the draft report being released in spring or summer of 2025. Again, we'll be receiving feedback from interested parties and stakeholders at that time in order for us to go ahead and move forward with the final feasibility study report, which we anticipate being released in the fall of 2025. Next slide, please. All right, now we're moving into the listening session portion of today's meeting. The purpose of the listening session is to gather collaborative feedback from all of you. We want to make sure that there's an understanding of the expectation that we're working at right now. In addition to the initial assessment that Dan shared with you, that our goal is to maintain in place the existing coastal rail line and minimize passenger and freight service disruptions for up to 30 years. In doing so, we will be continuing to assess vulnerabilities and any concerns and any potential opportunities for further collaboration with organizations, agencies, and businesses such as yourselves. And then we'll be documenting that feedback. Next slide, please. So before I move on, I just want to make sure that there's not any additional comments or questions regarding the potential reinforcement areas that Dan walked us through. If you have any questions, please feel free to raise your hand or put your question in the chat, and we'll be calling on you as you have your question. We're also looking for any feedback of any other conditions that you're aware of that perhaps should be assessed as well as a part of this study. Again, feel free to raise your hand, and if we call on you, if you could be so kind as to give your name and your agency or business, that would be very helpful. Same as if you put your question in the chat. Right. I've not seen anything, so I'm going to go ahead and keep going. So next slide, please. All right. So we have a series of questions for all of you, and I will go through them one by one. So how important, based on this presentation and what you've learned from today in general, what you've heard in the media regarding what we've been doing recently with the reinforcement area that we're working on right now, how important is this rail corridor to your particular business or agency that you represent?
Christina, there's a hand up.
Okay. I can't see whose hand it is. Could you?
Evan?
Evan, thank you.
Yeah, hi, this is Evan. I'm from the San Diego Regional Chamber of Commerce. So down here in San Diego, thanks for letting me join the Orange County Fund today. I think speaking from kind of our region's perspective, obviously very important rail corridor for connecting business, connecting travel between San Diego, Orange County, LA, and onward. And I think some of my main input in terms of this study and just in general is how important it is to have the collaboration between OCTA, between SANDAG down here, between SCAG, basically, making sure that all of the planning organizations and relevant stakeholders that are affected by something that happens on this corridor are kept in the loop. I think, obviously, it seems like this study is tackling some great improvements. We know right now the things that have been happening at San Clemente, and it's like, even if that is fixed, and then the next week down here in Del Mar, Solana Beach, there's erosion, that really doesn't help all of us as a whole. That doesn't help folks get between LA and San Diego without disruptions. So I think I would just emphasize how important it is that you all are connected with, all the San Diego and LA area groups, sharing the findings from this study with them. And even in terms of state agencies that are involved and can help unlock funding. I just think that interconnectivity is so important since this is the second busiest rail corridor in the country. So that's my San Diego 2 cents on it.
Very good. Thank you for that feedback. Yes, all the organizations and agencies that you have mentioned in your remarks, we are coordinating closely with all of them. They're definitely a part of this process. Out of curiosity, something that came to mind, do you have any thoughts on whether or not when we have any service disruptions, it's a bigger challenge in certain months of the year, like the summer versus maybe this time of year? Is that something that you would be able to weigh in on?
Yeah, I mean, I think during the summer is a bigger disruption just in terms of higher tourism season for us, and I'm sure it's the same for you all. I mean, obviously, any time of year is going to be a significant disruption, but I think summer especially, just because usually down here we're flooded with tourists then.
Very good. Thank you. And any other comments on that item? Tim Jackson.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody.
Hello.
I'm Tim Jackson from the Army Corps of Engineers Regulatory Division, Los Angeles District. I'm based out of the Carlsbad Field Office down in San Diego. Dan, good to see you. Christina, nice to meet you virtually. I'd say from a regulatory perspective, Dan hit on it very well, that there's going to be other regulatory agencies beyond the Corps of Engineers involved in conversations associated with reinforcement work, associated with a short medium-term solution. And but we do think it's good that OCTA is being thoughtful about, you know, taking some proactive measures to get ahead of, you know, what looks to be continued, you know, challenges, at least in this 7-mile section of the coastline. Dan mentioned that there's been some emergency actions in the past. We've been involved in those discussions, obviously. So it would be good if we could reduce the number of emergency actions. And so we think it's good that you guys are implementing the study. Looks like you guys have laid out a number of really good milestones. So it's well thought out. So we're happy to participate in this and looking forward to future conversations with you guys.
Thank you, Tim. I just want to add that, and this is an offer for everyone. If there's an interest on having one-on-one or focus meetings, we're more than happy to set one up with your agency. We've already had one-on-one meetings with a couple of other agencies since we started this study and launched the study in January. So happy to go into more in-depth and details on kind of our thought process, also get your thought process on kind of a go-forward basis.
All right, I don't see any other hands up. I'll move on to the next question. In what ways do you believe the resilience of the rail corridor is important to the economic strength of your business or agency and the broader community?
Christina, there's a comment in the chat by
Okay.
Rick.
All right, chat. Let's see here, Rick. More help from the government as they use it to move heavy military vehicles up and down the coast.
So maybe I'll just kind of touch on that. That is one of the things that we are well aware of, that it is part of the National Defense Strategic Rail Network. So that's one of the reasons why we have engaged everyone at all levels, whether it's a private, ranging from, say, a private homeowners association that's adjacent to the railroad, all the way up to the federal government, and obviously everybody in between. So it is something that we need to continue to make sure we educate everyone on what's going on out there, kind of the day-to-day of what's going on out there, because it is very much fluid in terms of some of the situations we've been seeing out there in terms of the landslides and the occurrences. So it is something that I think is really, really important, and I'm glad that others recognize that as well. So thank you for that comment.
All right. Don't see any other hands raised.
Christina,
Yeah.
this is Alice Rogan, also with OCTA, and I'm the Director of Marketing and Public Outreach. I see former employee Judy Hernandez on the line, who's now with Disney. I'm interested in, because Disney is such a large employer, when we say employee commute, I know you guys like to encourage ride sharing. Hey, Judy. Do you have any thoughts on this?
Hi, Alice, and hi, everyone. Yes, I was actually holding off for the next bullet, but that's really the reason that I'm on the line today.
Okay.
That particular corridor obviously not only impacts our parks, but it also impacts our employees that are coming into Orange County campuses, but then are also going further north to our Los Angeles campuses as well. And so anything that we can do to learn more, or if we can be of use, because this is definitely something that is very of interest as we see employees being impacted because of those closures. Oftentimes, obviously, they happen without notice. And so then our team is working towards helping them find alternatives. And so, again, if there's something that we can do, this is really interesting for us. And that's why I'm on the call.
Okay, great. Thanks, Judy.
See then, Mary or anyone else, would you like to weigh in? No? Okay. All right, let's see. How would rail service disruptions affect your business operations, specifically logistics, supply chain management, employee commute, and revenue? Did anyone else have any thoughts on that besides Julie? Are there any of the questions that other questions you'd like to weigh in on, Rick, that you see on the screen? I know you've had some thoughts thus far. Or Emma Burrows?
Hi, apologies. I'm going to keep my camera off. I'm feeling a little under the weather.
No.
But I'm Emma. I'm with the Anaheim and Orange County Hotel and Lodging Association, and like to echo a lot of the comments that Judy mentioned, particularly pertaining to employee commutes. And of course, I think a previous person noted summertime tourism as hotel and lodging hoteliers and providers in the area. That's also of a significant concern to us, and just really appreciate you folks opening these channels of communication, and we'll be sure to keep in contact with you guys as these things progress. But I would really like to echo the comments made by Judy and the gentleman from San Diego.
Great, thank you. Is there any other ways besides sessions like this and emailing the content that would be helpful for us to communicate progress on this study? Oh, I saw that Mr. Avila, did you want to make a comment?
Hi, everyone. Yes, I'm Pepe Avila, Vice President of Tourism and Partnerships for Visit Anaheim. And in regards to revenue, what I'd like to indicate that, for example, for Anaheim, and I know I saw my colleagues from the Anaheim Orange County Hotel Lodging Association and Disney, is that Visit Anaheim, we promote our destination as in the center of Southern California, especially when we attract international markets. And when we promote the opportunity to explore Los Angeles and San Diego, but continue to base or stay in the area, not only in Anaheim, but in Orange County, or the other way around, for visitors staying in San Diego and visiting other areas. I think we're losing in revenue and the opportunity to connect one destination to another destination, and in regards to length of stay from visitors who, if they have the opportunity to explore without renting a car, using public transportation, using Metrolink or Amtrak, they will be able to explore more. They will be able to extend the length of stay and generate more revenue in regards to bed tax and also sales tax, and in general, the opportunity to support local businesses from the areas that they visit. So that is, and especially from markets like Australia, New Zealand, that are very strong markets for us in the area, that are very savvy travelers that like to use public transportation and they feel comfortable about it. I think there's an opportunity in regards to these disruptions that could prevent visitors for staying longer in our regions.
Very good. Thank you for that. Is there anything else that folks would like to add? Beck, do you have any thoughts you'd want to share?
This is Beck. No, not quite yet. Still noodling, but thank you.
No problem. Thank you for joining us today. Let's see here. Hershen. Or Rick, did you have anything else you wanted to add?
This is Herschel. I don't really have anything to add right now. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much for joining us. All right. What are some other ways that we can involve your organization in the study process? Is there any other strategies? We do have our project website that I believe we are putting in the chat if we haven't already. Yes, it is on there. That website will have updated information as the study progresses. There's also a link on there that you can encourage any of your colleagues, associates, anyone actually, to go ahead and go to that website and sign up on our database to receive updates on the study as it moves forward. On the study website, you will also see that we have a schedule we shared with you today, as well as a link to our fact sheet for the study that is a PDF that's easily downloadable. And we will be putting other materials on the website as they become available. There's a link to the fact sheet. A direct link was put in the chat as well.
Christina?
Yes.
So this group is, we've heard the perspectives of the revenue impacts and employee commute impacts. As you can imagine, there's competing interests in a study like this and ultimate strategies for improvement, where some people just want to shut the rail corridor down or they want to move it inland. And I just wanted to reach out to this group that there might be a point down the road where we would need to have the voices of the businesses affected to kind of offset what we're hearing, or at least, juxtapose against it. So that's why we're really happy that you're participating today, and hope that down the road, when it gets to that point, that you'll continue to participate.
Very good. Thank you, Alice. Okay. Let's see here. Could you, next slide, please. I just wanted to revisit the study milestones one more time and just double check that there weren't any comments or questions on the schedule, any clarity that we could provide regarding the key milestones and their delivery. And then if you would be so kind to put in the chat any others in your organization that you want to be included in this study, or of course, give them a link to the website. We'd be happy to have them sign up to make sure they receive information as it's available. Next slide, please. And we're also looking to see if you've heard any feedback or key themes from others at your organization or otherwise regarding this effort, and if you have any thoughts on that you'd like to share with us. And if you have any lists of stakeholders that you'd be willing to share, we would love those as well. And we will be utilizing your organizations as a means to provide notification support. And as we shared earlier, continue to share information about the study. So we'll be making materials available to you, including the slide deck from today, so you can share those with others. Next slide. Next slide. In regards to the listening session schedule, Dan referred to this earlier. We've had a couple of sessions already with our project development team and yesterday with the stakeholder working group. And then we have several others scheduled throughout the spring with freight and goods movement, representatives, emergency responders, of course, the coastal marine habitat community. And then we will go more broad with residential groups, homeowners associations throughout the Dana Point, San Clemente, and San Juan Capistrano area. And then we'll have a series of general public sessions, one virtual and one in person. If you know anyone that might be interested in attending those, please feel free to invite them. And then, of course, we'll be briefing our elected officials. There's quite a few elected officials that represent this area, and we'll be having a roundtable with them in May. Next slide, please. And of course, please don't hesitate to stay connected to Dan and myself throughout the study. We're accessible to you. As Dan mentioned, we're available to do one-on-one briefings with any representatives that you think would benefit at your organization or business. And we encourage you to go to the project website on a regular basis for updates. And we will be sending out email updates to you now that you're a part of our database and our study community. Anything you'd like to add, Dan, before we wrap up?
No, I just want to let everyone know I really appreciate you taking time out of your busy schedule and providing the input that you have today, and we'll continue to keep you abreast of the study progress. And if you have any additional thoughts afterward, feel free to let either one of us know. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Any last minute comment or questions before we end? All right, well, thank you all for your time, and we appreciate your collaboration. Have a great day.
Thank you.